Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay in the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is brought to you by the Unger Real Estate Group, brokered by eXp Realty, proudly serving Orange, Seminole, and Lake counties. Call 407-790-9957 or visit WeSellOrlando.net. Welcome to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast 2018 UCF Football Preview Show. My name is Jeff Sharon, and it is hard to believe we're recording this on Monday, August the 27th. We are just 96 hours away from UCF football, and my gosh, the offseason's over. Now that we've settled the whole national championship question, it's time for everything to start happening. My name is Jeff Sharon. Joining me tonight will be Brian Murphy. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hey, Eric Lopez. He's joining me, too. What's up, Elo?
What's going on?
And joining us for the first time, the former Inside the Dungeon on Twitter. Now, we're going to use his actual name now. Luke Sarris joins us for this show. How are you, Luke? Welcome aboard.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are happy to have you here because it means a little bit less work for the three of us. We've got all right. So we are Black and Gold Banneret. We are SB Nation's home for UCF Knights sports. You can follow us at blackandgoldbanneret.com. You can hit us up at facebook.com/blackandgoldbanneret and on Twitter at UCF_Banneret as well. You can follow me at Jeff_Sharon. Eric is at Eric Lopez Elo. Brian is at Spokes_Murphy. And Luke is at Luke Sarris. That's with two R's, Sarris, SBN, Luke Sarris, SBN. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, if you don't already, on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn. All right, here's the drill, boys. We're going to start by talking basically four major topics. We're going to talk about Josh Heupel and his staff coming in to UCF in their first season. We will then transition to the offense, and then we will talk the defense and Randy Shannon and talk about the schedule. We're going to just kind of give our thoughts in general about this team coming off, of course, a 13-0 undefeated season, the first undefeated year in UCF history, national championship as officially recognized by the NCAA this week. Can't take it away. It's in the book. And now here we are. Josh Heupel becomes... or at least he's trying to become only the third UCF head coach to get to post a winning record in his first season. He is also trying to become the first head coach to take over an undefeated so-called Group of Five team since 1984, to take over the year after they were undefeated. He's only the third guy to do that. He's trying to become only the second to achieve a winning record. So, tall task in front of Josh Heupel. Brian Murphy, I'm going to start with you. You've been around this team since they started camp. There's been a lot of questions in the fan base. So, we know that this is a different guy than Scott Frost, but if you could compare and contrast the two, how is Josh Heupel different than what we've seen before?
Just from talking to him, they're both pretty close to the vest as far as, things they don't want you to know. And things they want you to know. I think, one thing about Josh that stands out is how much he's talked about family and connection. And look, all coaches talk about that, about wanting to bond with their players and have this relationship with them that goes beyond football. But Josh has talked about it so much, and you've seen it on Twitter with all his photos with different classes and different position groups. It really feels like it's like part of the crux of his coaching is like, look, we're going to try to win football games, but we're also really concentrating on the off the field stuff and trying to really make a relationship here, which has been crucial for a first year staff taking over this team with this much talent. I'm sure, and Scott Frost, obviously a lot of players still love him. So in that way, they're similar. But I think that aspect with Josh Heupel has been really consistent. And after a while, it's just like, yeah, he really believes this. I mean, it's not just sort of he's not just trying to make a good soundbite. Like, it's really part of who he is. I think that's one thing that's really stood out.
Sorry, Brian. Have the players bought in? Do you feel like they bought in?
I think so now. I mean, there were certainly people that were skeptical. I think more so with the defensive switch, going from the 3-4 to the 4-3, about how this is all going to work. But certainly, I think they know that the coaches are in. They're all in on this too. I think they're bought in, certainly on offense, because the speed isn't really changing. A lot of the principles are going to be the same. Like those guys, it's almost pretty. There's a lot of similar roots to what they've already run, so they're cool with it. I think there was more massaging that needed to be done with the defensive players, and I think at this point that's been accomplished as well.
Eric Lopez, you've been there too. You've seen what Heupel has been able to has talked about with this team. We followed the process all throughout this period of time. Do you sense that the same things that Brian is talking about here, that obviously there's going to be some growing pains, but that the players feel like they're ready to go here, that there's not that much more buy-in that has to be done. They're ready to go now under their new leadership?
Yeah, I mean, but I don't think you really truly find that out until you're actually in games and you're in the fourth quarter. I mean, spring ball, fall ball, it is what it is. It's what happens between the lines. Now, the thing that Josh has the advantage is he's got a very talented roster coming back. So the truth to be told, we may not know how good of a coach Josh Heupel is for a year or two, because really he's in a kind of a no-win situation. If they have a big year this year, well, people are going to say outside of the program, well, that was Scott Frost's players. If he, quote unquote, loses a couple games, now people are going to get on him. Like, how can you lose a couple games? So he's kind of in an awkward spot. But, I don't think the players and the coaches, they do a good job of blocking all that stuff out. I think people make too much of the adjustment period as far as prior to a football game. I don't think you truly find out until, okay, how do you handle a 3rd and 5? What are you going to call here in a fourth quarter of a one-possession game? So I think it's to be determined to see how they truly click on there. But as far as the players, I think they've adjusted to it, and I think they're ready to go.
Well, it certainly helps to have a guy like Mackenzie Milton back. Heisman Trophy candidate. UCF's already begun that campaign. Rewrote a number of things in the UCF record book last year. And we've written before on blackandgoldbanneret.com about how Josh Heupel comes with his own offensive credentials, particularly the fact that, look what he did with Mizzou's offense last year. Luke, let's get you in on this as well, because this is like Eric and Brian talked about, this is such a tough act to follow. But Heupel was successful with Drew Lock at Mizzou. Excuse me. He comes in with how much more can they realistically think that this offense might improve, and what do we think they might be able to improve heading into 2018?
Well, I mean, it hasn't been any secret what he's trying to accomplish. He wants to pass the ball, downfield, and wants to get more vertical deep passing, and he wants to run the ball north and south more. So obviously that is a little different from how Scott Frost ran the offense last year, but I don't think we're going to see certainly any lack of production, especially with Mackenzie being another year older going into his junior year. I am curious to see how things like those power back situations play out with guys like Cordarian Richardson and Jawan transferring. I'm sure we will see guys like Taj and Craig take over those roles, but the proof is in the pudding. I mean, he was successful everywhere he went, and he completely transformed that Missouri offense. And I don't think there's any doubt by the fans or the players that he is a great offensive mind, and he knows how to put points on the board.
Well, that's going to transition us nicely into the next thing I want to talk about, which is about the offense, because that was, to me, over the last 2 years, just the stunning turnaround of the UCF offense. How many years did we as fans complain about how conservative George O'Leary was, even at the times when he wasn't that conservative, like thinking back to 2013 when Charlie Taft really allowed Blake Bortles to blossom into eventually a top 3 NFL draft pick. But when we look at this offense last year, like we said, they rewrote the UCF record books by team. Interestingly enough, I found this out. UCF's run-pass ratio last year, 54% run, 46% pass. People think that Scott Frost's offense was a passing offense. It really was not. It had a lot of sort of modern twists on the old kind of option offense that he ran at Nebraska. So as a player, so in comes Josh Heupel, who wants to attack, like Luke said, up the field a lot more. But and in comes Mackenzie Milton. Brian, I'll throw it back to you. Mackenzie, what a turnaround we saw from last year. What could he possibly do for an encore in 2018?
Well, yes, it's difficult to repeat what he did, and I think people look at him and see a guy who obviously he runs a lot and he scrambles and he's very improvisational with the way he plays, but he's just a very good passer, and you have to really look at the stats to see like how accurate he is on his deep balls, which he was very, very much so last season. And I think that's something that he's really stressed so far this year is like, he knows that he can make a play on his own when things break down, but he said he wants to, wait more and be more patient in the pocket and examine his options. Now, obviously, best laid plans are great until your offensive line breaks down. So, really it's about the offensive line holding up. If he wants to be in the pocket more, the guys in front of him need to block, but I think that's one thing that he's going to try to do is when he drops back, he's not going to look to run as urgently as he did last year. He's going to try to throw from the pocket. And he showed last year that, either on the run or in the pocket, he's a pretty proficient passer, both in the short range and deep.
Eric, we saw how good Traquan Smith last year. He led the team with 59 catches, 1,100 yards. He's now a New Orleans Saint and getting ready to steal a starting job over there. Jordan Akins also another 32 catches, 500 yards, gone off the team because he decided to take his chances in the NFL. But you spoke this week with a guy who's going to be a key part of this offense. Or at least we think so, assuming obviously he stays healthy. Otis Anderson in a feature on Black and Gold Banneret that you'll see here. Eric's first 7 points feature on what was on Otis. What do you think about the fact that in the depth chart he's listed as a utility guy? I know we've kind of got used to positionless football, but how important is he going to be in how this offense follows up from last year?
Well, I think he's going to be very important because I think they're hoping to have him line up and get some mismatches. I talked to him, obviously. He's going to line up at times at wide receiver. At times he's going to be a running back. And I think that's going to be, something he's always been interested doing since he was growing up. He was watching LaDainian Tomlinson, who was kind of really one of the first to do it in the NFL. And, but even more recently, I think Percy Harvin was a guy that he could relate to from a height standpoint and everything like that. So he's been working hard on that. And I think it gives UCF some, diversity because certainly you're not going to replace a Traquan Smith production or the player. Now they have other receivers, they're talented, but I do think that what made UCF's offense very difficult last year is when you have guys like Adrian Killings, when you have a guy like Otis who can bring mismatches right on the field that your defense really can't adjust to, and especially when you go at a very high tempo. Otis could line up at 1 minute in a running back position. The next minute he's lined out, and as a defense, you're kind of scrambling. So I think he's going to get more reps. I think he's going to certainly, in talking to him, I get a sense. I think he's ready. He feels a lot more mature than he was maybe a year ago, a lot more understands what he's doing more. And, he's got high aspirations. He sees what Traquan's doing in the NFL. I think that's his ultimate goal. And so I think he's going to be a big part of that in creating matchup advantages for UCF here throughout the year.
Luke, what do you think could be one of the downfalls here? Like, what would you see would be a situation where all of a sudden things just kind of where we start to get concerned? What are you looking for?
Well, I'm not looking for any downfalls, obviously. I hope
maybe
the
I am.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I don't even want to bring up, but is a potential injury at quarterback. It's not a deep position. Daryl Mack has been performing well this camp, but he besides McKenzie, nobody has any actual game experience. So I mean that is kind of like a doomsday scenario. But another thing, like I mentioned before, Heupel has not been secret about his desire to run more north and south, and that's not Adrian Killen's style of football. I'm not saying that he can't, but you want to get him to the edges so he can break free and burn everybody and leave them in the dust. Cordier and Richardson really fit that mold of a true power back, pounding right up the middle, but he's gone. So guys like Taj and Greg McCray are going to be really needed to fill those roles. But I'm curious to see how much of the run game Heupel plans on transitioning to that more north and south truly type of play.
So I'm going to throw this question out to the three of you, and I'll let whichever one of you wants to jump in first answer it first, and we'll go from there. Give me best case scenario, worst case scenario for the offense for 2018. And I guess all right. Let me pick Eric. I'll start with you.
Say that again.
Best case scenario. Give me a best case scenario for the offense and a worst case scenario for the offense, in your opinion.
As far as production?
Yeah, as far as what they would be able to do.
Here's the problem. I think people have these high expectations based on last year. They might be just as good, but it won't feel that way. What I mean by that is people don't realize this. Last year's offense improved per play, 2 yards a play. No team has done that in over a decade. It was an enormous
2 yards per play better than the year before.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what they have. No team has done that in the last decade. So to suggest that they're going to, and I've heard people, to suggest they're going to be better. No, I don't think they're going to be better because that's as good as it gets. Like nobody does that. Nobody jumps 2 yards. You have to assume everybody stays healthy like last year. I don't think, that people a lot of things bounced right. So I think the high ceiling is they'll be one of the best offenses in the country once again, top 3, top 5, even number 1 again in scoring. Who knows? I think that's the ceiling, certainly. But I also wouldn't panic. I think the low ceiling would be, hey, maybe, and I think Luke brought it up, and I think it's an interesting point. The running game, and Jeff, you brought it up. And when Scott Frost got here, when he got hired, I said this was going to be more of a running team. This is not going to be an aired out team. Mm-hmm. They ran the ball for 54% of the time, as you mentioned. So even though they went fast, they also knew how to adjust as far as, hey, we need to take some time off here. Let's not go super fast. What's going to happen here will be fascinating. How they run the football. Will they be as effective? One of the risks is, okay, you want to be more vertical, but if you're too vertical, that could be quick 3 and out. So I think that's the worst fear is that maybe they don't hit the third down conversion rate as high this year as they did last year, which is another underrated stat that people have kind of forgotten about.
Yeah. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, the best case scenario is they do exactly what they did last year. Like it doesn't get any better. The worst case scenario is, I have some questions about the offensive line. Like I know that Wyatt Miller is very experienced, and like flipping from right tackle to left tackle may not be a huge adjustment, but they do have basically four guys starting who didn't play their full time last year. Tyler Hodanik, is at left guard, but he was hurt. He played through a lot of injuries. He played at 9 games and was really hurt in most of them. And then the right side of the line is basically brand new. I think if that line, isn't as good as last year's line, which I believe did not give up a sack in like the first 6 games of last year. If that line breaks down, then obviously that blows up everything. That blows up your running game, which this team is dependent upon. And they could get Mackenzie Milton hurt, which again, like we've mentioned, like he's not a Cam Newton sized quarterback. He's pretty thin. He's pretty small. So it doesn't take a whole lot of pounding to break him. That's the worst case scenario, is that this offensive line is not as nearly as good. And then it kind of derails from there.
Luke.
Best case scenario. I mean, I don't want to be just like everybody else, but I mean, that is the best case scenario. How much better could the offense be? If they are scoring more points per game, that will be amazing. And the thing of it is that I say this all the time. It's hard to find expectations that are realistic when you're a fan, because when you're a fan, you think, oh man, this year it's going to be faster. We're going to score more points. It's going to be even greater than last year. And to be honest, last year was a perfect storm of so many different things that came together for things to click right. So, best case scenario, we're still top in the country in offense, which I honestly think we will be. Worst case scenario, there's a dip in production. I don't know whether that would attribute to lack of skill. I think talent wise, the offense is just as talented as it was last year. But there is a learning curve when implementing a new system, and I know some things will be the same or similar to what the team ran last year. But you can't expect in one off season for a team to have a new staff come in, change things around, and completely grasp it and perfect it. So I think if there is a dip in production, it's going to be steadily improved as the season goes on and as they get more comfortable running Heupel's offense, game by game.
To give everybody a little bit of perspective here, last year UCF, the scoring offense, tops in the country at 48.2 points per game. They were one of only 2 teams to score over 600 points. Oklahoma scored 632. UCF scored 627, but the Knights scored more touchdowns than Oklahoma, 84 touchdowns. Those are the only 2 teams to score 80 touchdowns on the year. Memphis, interestingly,
with less games,
right? They scored more touchdowns with 1 fewer game. You're right, Luke. Memphis scored 79 touchdowns in 13 games, which was 3rd best in the country, and they averaged 45.5 points per game. That was 2nd. So if you could see a situation where, let's say UCF averages, pulling a number out of a hat here, 45 a game. That's a field goal drop from last year, which is kind of unbelievable when you think about it, that they could drop 3 points per game and still theoretically be one of the top 5 offenses in the country. But that's the situation that we're looking at. So we'll be following that very closely as we head into 2018. All right, we're going to take a short break. We come back. We're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball. Randy Shannon comes in, introduces a new defensive system. How's UCF going to adopt to that? And the schedule, of course. It's always a big thing that we have to talk about because quite often how you do in a given season is dictated by who you play and when you play them. And that was UCF's case last year a lot of the way. So stick around. We'll be right back. This is the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is brought to you by the Unger Real Estate Group, brokered by eXp Realty. Sam Unger and his team proudly serve Orange, Seminole, and Lake counties, specializing in buying, selling, and new construction. He's a proud UCF graduate, class of 2006, and he's got a special deal going on right now for the 2018 football season. Knight fans, if you work with Sam as your realtor, he will rebate you up to $750 at closing. So if you're ready to buy a new home or sell your current home, upgrade or downsize, Sam and his team have you covered so you can find the right home at the right price in the right location. So give them a call right now at 407-790-9957. Again, that's 407-790-9957. Or visit them on the web at WeSellOrlando.net. Again, that's WeSellOrlando.net. You can also reach them on Facebook at facebook.com/WeSellOrlando. Get in touch with the Unger Real Estate Group today and make finding your dream home a reality.
Hello, Night Nation. I'm Andrew Fegley.
And I'm Trey Strelko. Where are we? This isn't our usual spot.
It looks like we've landed in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those guys.
You know, Nightline has UCF sports covered.
Week in and week out, we bring you interviews with newsmakers and in-depth analysis of UCF sports.
Subscribe to our weekly podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Be sure to subscribe to Nightline on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at UCF_Nightline.
Trace, can we go back to the 1148 studios now and start working on our next all-new Nightline?
How do we get out of here? Go Knights!
Charge on.
Now back to you guys in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
We're back here at the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast 2018 UCF Football Preview Show. Jeff Sharon, Eric Lopez, Brian Murphy, Luke Sarris joining us here. We are SB Nation's home for UCF sports. UCF_Banneret on Twitter, Facebook.com/Black and Gold Banneret, blackandgoldbanneret.com. All right, fellas. We talked about the defense, we talked about the offense. Josh Heupel and the tough act that they all have to follow. Let's switch sides over to the defensive side of the ball. When Josh Heupel was hired, it was basically a 2 for the price of 1 because Randy Shannon came in the same exact day. He's the defensive coordinator. He does a lot of recruiting. We know that Randy Shannon means defense, going back to his time at the University of Miami, where he was a player, later a coach. He comes over, of course, from Florida, where he worked on their defense. And was their interim coach. And now notoriously, Randy Shannon is not, let's just say he makes himself scarce to the media. However, Brian Murphy, he was available just recently and kind of gave everybody an update on the defense coming into this season. So there's kind of like this, I don't know, man. It feels like there's this mysterious fog around him since he's come over here to UCF. So what can we glean so far about Randy Shannon in his tenure at UCF to this point?
Yeah, we met with him on Sunday, and I believe he actually set his stopwatch to like 5 minutes. Like they said like 5 minutes, and he put it on his stopwatch.
Wow, that's pretty ruthless.
Hey, he doesn't. His job is not to talk to us, so that's fine.
Fair enough.
I think the one thing we've heard the most, obviously, everybody has questions about the linebacking core because of Shaquem and replacing him. But I think the biggest change in going for the 4-3 and what everybody has said is that they really want the frontline guys, your Joey Connors, your Tristan Hills, guys like that to get upfield and create more tackles for loss, more sacks. Last year running the 3-4, they had guys who were sort of two-gapping, trying to clog lanes, stuff like that. They want more pressures. So I think that's one thing that they're going to try to bring. But again, this is a defense that's got, I think, they're trying to replace 6 full-time starters. They've got some good depth along the defensive line. The secondary is very much experienced. I'm really looking forward to seeing how those back four play, and they've got some really good young backup safeties and corners. That front seven, though, does have some questions because they basically replace 3 guys on the defensive line, with Jemias Pippin, Tony Garrard, and Savon Lowry. Mm-hmm. And obviously you've got, behind them, Shaquan and Shaquem also leaving. So it sounds great because they've talked a lot how that, they've got 9 or 10 guys along the defensive line they really trust, and they're going to rotate. And, I talked to Eric Mitchell and Sean Burgess-Becker in the last couple of days. They're going to be starting at the Sam and Will linebacker spots outside of Pat Jasinski in the middle. And they've all said the right things, and it sounds great. But like with the offense, we just don't know what it's going to look like until we see it on the field. So while they have talent, I just don't know if it's enough to replace the 6 full-time starters that they have to replace, and if they have the right guys for the new scheme.
Luke, you discussed on an article on blackandgoldbanneret.com, shameless plug, who's going to lead the defense? Like Brian was alluding to, obviously Shaquem is gone. And he was such a huge leader, both on and off the field, not just in terms of running the X's and O's and the schemes out there, but and obviously with his incredibly talented play, but as a guy that the defense always looked to, especially the younger guys out there. So, who are some of the guys that this defense is going to that are going to be some of the big names? Is there someone who's going to more or less take that spot of Shaquem as the emotional leaders out there, or maybe a guy who leads by example?
The reality of the situation is, a player like Shaquem, both on the field and as a leader, they only come around, every so often. It's not like you graduate one of those guys and then there's another guy waiting behind him. Shaquem was a special player and a special man. And, his presence is definitely going to be missed. But I do think there, is a good group of seniors on this defense who will step up and definitely lead by example. Just because they've been around, most of these seniors, they've been through 3 coaching changes already. So they've played in the 4-3. They've done it all. They've switched schemes, switched coaches. There are guys like Titus Davis who, was with Shaquem in the linebacker group previously before switching to D end. I think he's been great with the media. I think he's going to be a guy who is going to step up and be a leader on this defense. Joey Connors is another guy who sticks out. Every time I hear him talk, he's a real mature presence. And I think that's going to be big as well. And then, you got guys like Pat Jasinski, who, I think he'll be one of those guys who leads by example. He's a real quiet kind of guy, but, when it's time for him to talk, that locker room listens. And then you have Kyle Gibson, who really transitioned into more of a leader role alongside Trey Neal for last season. With Trey, transferring to Nebraska, I think Kyle is going to be crucial in helping those younger guys come along.
Yeah, you mentioned Pat Jasinski, Luke, and underrated fact, like we talked about. Trivia question for everyone out there: who was UCF's leading tackler in 2017? It wasn't Shaquem Griffin. It was Luke. It was Pat Jasinski. So
it was Luke Sarris.
It was.
You're going to say Luke Sarris.
I was about to say it was Luke Jasinski. No, it was Pat Jasinski. But Eric, I want to go back to you because, we, like we've talked about, how good Shaquem was, and the holes in the front 7 that are going to have to be filled. I think a lot of people were critical of the defense late last year, but they lost sight of the fact that team was playing 11 consecutive weeks after the hurricane. The last 2 weeks against 2 of the top, I think, 5 offenses in the country, or 2 of the top 10 offenses in the country in USF and Memphis. And the secondary, I think, at times really did get burned. And Trey Neal was one of those guys that I think took a lot of flack, but he was an underrated leader for this team last year. Do you think, Eric, that he might be one of those guys that maybe UCF really does miss more than you might think, or could it be somebody else whose presence that you feel might be felt more than anything?
I think it's a combination. I mean, yes, Jasinski led them in tackles. Part of the reason I would argue they led in tackles is because everybody was game planning for Shaquem Griffin.
Yeah, because
he had just won Defensive Player of the Year. He got a lot of attention and really helped a lot of other guys make plays. Trey, obviously, it's funny. Fans have an interesting perspective. They only have selective memory. I feel like Trey is, all of a sudden, because he leaves for Nebraska, nobody ever likes a player leaving their team. They tend to pick out, look at him against South Florida. He looked terrible. Yeah, he got burned on a couple plays in the
Everybody looked terrible on defense against South Florida. They gave up 605 yards to one guy.
I mean, what it's funny is, when our offense makes plays, it's because we're a great offense. When the other team scores on us, like Memphis, who, by the way, was one of the, you mentioned earlier, is one of the better offenses in the country as well. Apparently, it was defensive fault, right?
Yeah, Memphis was the number 2 scoring offense in the country. UCF was number 1.
Which included, and Murph and I talked about it in the press box, Anthony Miller, who is now a starting wide receiver at the Chicago Bears. As much as everybody loves Traquan, and I'm the biggest Traquan guy, I think Anthony Miller may end up being even just as good, if not better, in the NFL. He's already ahead of him by starting, whereas Traquan is still trying to get a gig with the Saints starting wise. So I think where you miss those guys is depth. And again, this is going to be a repeated thing. This team did not have any injuries at all of significance. And I think while you might have a guy that can replace Trey, that's just as talented, if not more talented, the issue becomes what happens if that guy goes down, and then what happens? And I think there's a rippling effect there. And I do believe in intangibles. I think Shaquem Griffin was a guy that rose to the occasion in the Peach Bowl. I do think, Trey Neal, what I do remember with Trey Neal is he made big plays. He did get the interception. Murph brought up the defensive line. The guys that put pressure, they're gone. And they were hungry. They hadn't won before. Are these guys still as motivated and hungry? It's a lot harder when you've gone, undefeated in a season and have the success that you did. So I think it's more about the intangibles of the concern than the actual physical talent that's my concern.
Any worries at all, Eric, about the move to Randy Shannon's 4-3?
Yes. First of all, that's a scheme, change. Now, I think a 4-3, 3-4 players will tend to adjust. You have enough athletes that can do a little bit of both. But yeah, I think there's going to be pressure on Randy Shannon here. Let's be honest. Didn't end well at Miami. There's a reason why he's here. It didn't end well at Florida either. So I think people are kind of wait and seeing about how this defense looks. Will it be better? Will the scheme be better? Who knows? I think time will tell. But yeah, I think there's questions with the scheme. I think there's questions. Does the scheme fit the roster? One of the things that I think was interesting about, the previous staff was they allowed players to have input as far as, hey, look, I don't know if this works, man. Can we try this? Can we try that? And I think it worked. Will Randy do that? I don't know. Time will tell. Can they adjust to what they have personnel-wise? Time will tell if something's not working. I think those are some of the questions that, again, we'll find out during the season.
Yeah, well, time will tell. They always told me in grad school, don't end a story on that. So I can't end the story on that. But I do think that when you're talking about a totally different personality of a staff, that may very well manifest itself in a different way. But we're going to find out, like you said, Eric, real quick as we make our transition over to talking about the schedule, because unlike last year, unlike the year before, UCF does not start with a relative cupcake. You're starting on a Thursday. No, hey, listen.
Here we go.
Listen,
did the schedule change? Did the schedule change?
Listen. The opener, Thursday, August 30th, on the road at Connecticut. Okay, I get it. But this is a conference game against an experienced head coach, and you got a first-year head coach for UCF, first-year staff. On the road, they're going to get. That UConn is at least going to be getting up for this game, right? And that's where it starts. 7 p.m. national television, ESPNU, on the road, in conference to start. Now they get the short, the like a half bye week basically before the home opener against South Carolina State. But your other non-conference opponents at North Carolina, September 15th. Friday game against FAU at home. You for sure they've got that date scheduled. FAU's been chirping a little bit about that game. It's going to be on ESPN on a Friday night. Pitt at home, another non-conference. And then your in-conference schedule has some tough road games attached to it. Memphis on the road. We know how good Memphis was last year. We're going to see how good they are this year. East Carolina, always a tough game on the road. USF on the road to finish out the season. Home games for UCF on the conference slate include SMU, Temple, Navy, and Cincinnati. The one good thing is on the schedule, though, is that after that Saturday, October 20th game in Greenville against East Carolina, UCF doesn't leave the state until the end of the regular season at the very least. The Temple, Navy, Cincinnati games are all. First of all, there's a bye week on October the 27th. The weekend of October the 27th is the bye. At least that's the way it's scheduled right now. Who knows what Mother Nature has in store for us? But after that, Thursday, November 1st, at home against Temple. You're home for Navy, home for Cincinnati, and then at USF 100 miles away in Tampa. So at least that part of the schedule works out, in addition to the 3 straight home games against FAU, Pitt, and SMU. So my question is, Luke, I'm going to start with you on this one. We'll have you lead off. What are the worries for you when you just kind of look at the schedule and you're like, okay, this is the game that if UCF does trip up, this is the most likely game that they're going to trip up?
I mean, to me, it's the Memphis game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how similar Memphis is going to be to last season. You know, they definitely have some personnel change.
Yeah,
but
no more Riley Ferguson, thank God.
Yeah, well, I mean, we shut them down when we played them the first time, but you know that conference championship game was something else. And, you know, we're going to be in their house. So I definitely think that jumps out as, you know, definitely the biggest game that worries me. You know, East Carolina is a great atmosphere. I've been to games there. You know, it is a longer rivalry than I think most people know. I think we played them the second most out of any team we've ever played. But I don't think they're going to be nearly as competitive as they would need to be I mean, you know, granted, the season hasn't started. You really don't know how these teams are going to perform, but you know, it's lucky that I think having Pitt and FAU at home, huge advantages. But yeah, that Memphis game on the road definitely worries me.
Brian.
Well, I think I've already on record on this podcast by giving UCF's odds of going undefeated again the old Blutarski 0.0% chance.
Hater. You're such a hater.
Right? Because it just doesn't happen, right? Like, you know, how many times have Nick Saban's Alabama teams gone back-to-back undefeated? Oh, that's right, they haven't.
They haven't.
There's a reason why this hasn't happened since 94, 95 when Tom Osborne was at Nebraska. It just doesn't happen. So there's a loss here. Let's just throw that on the table. There's a loss this season, maybe 2, which is okay. I think, look, ending the season against South Florida, you know, it's like Ohio State, Michigan. You throw the records out and you see what happens. And obviously they will be thinking about that game and last year's game all week leading up to that rematch in Tampa. It's dangerous. It's obviously dangerous. And I think, yeah, having USF and Memphis, having both those games on the road, basically your 2 biggest threats in the conference, having both those games on the road, I think it's going to be really challenging, I'd say, for UCF to come out on both of those on top. And the FAU game is just going to be so fun, especially if FAU can somehow beat Oklahoma in Norman come week 1. That's going to be an amazing game in September.
Elo, what do you think?
Well, unlike Murph, I'm not going to go like 0%. And the reason is, I think this is a pretty soft schedule. I mean, I know people don't like to hear, they get defensive about the schedule and they yell about it. The reality is the Eastern Division's garbage. Let's just call it for what it is.
Wow.
There's
Elo
really
coming in strong with the Eastern Division.
It's probably the worst division in college football.
Whoa,
right?
Whoa. Wait a second.
What is this?
Okay, go ahead. Tell me.
How is Skip Bayless joining our podcast?
Whoa.
Hot takes.
Is this
Tell
the SEC network?
Listen, who's good in the division? Sell me on somebody good in the division. I mean, you're really worried about right at this hour. Now, part of this is a lot of the result of the coaching changes. You've had lots of changes around the league. You mentioned Randy Etzel's in his second year. I think Randy Etzel's a good coach. That's a massive project. He's got like freshmen and sophomores playing on the defensive side pretty much throughout the board. That's going to take time. They're not good right now. East Carolina's not good. I don't think Scotty Montgomery makes it past this year. They've been that bad. I think South Florida's got questions there at the quarterback position. They haven't beaten anybody of any quality in the last couple of years. There's a reason why they weren't ranked, because they didn't beat anybody good last year. and now you lose your greatest football player in the history of that program in Quentin Flowers. I'm skeptical how good they are. Cincinnati, Luke Fickell's in his second year. That's a project right now. The strength of the American Conference, and I've said this, is in the Western Division. And I think that, to me, UCF catches a break in that regard. They don't play Houston. They do go to Memphis. I agree. I think Memphis is the hardest conference game. You got to go to Memphis. I think Norvell's a great coach. Yes, they lose Ferguson at quarterback, but I think you have to trust Norvell and his offensive scheme. And if you look at the Memphis schedule, outside of a game at Navy week 2, their schedule's very soft, which should provide them with enough reps for their team to be ready to go when the UCF comes to town. So I think South Florida, I will agree with Murph in that from a rivalry standpoint, you can never count out a rivalry game. But we saw a Willie Taggart bad team give the UCF Fiesta Bowl team all they could handle on a Black Friday night. So I will agree with Murph there. But the Eastern Division's terrible. Like, stop it. Let's stop pretending like these Eastern teams are any good.
I've got one for you. I'm raising my hand, even though no one can see it because we're on a podcast. Conference USA West is pretty bad.
I was just looking at that.
Who we got in that division? Give me the breakdown.
We've got Texas San Antonio. We've got La Tech.
That where Larry Coker was? That was
yes, Larry Coker started that program. Who else do we have here? We have, I don't even freaking know. I guess Rice is
Texas,
in there.
El Paso.
UTEP is in there. I think Western Kentucky is in there.
Nope.
No? Okay, well, it's bad.
North
Texas.
UAB's
out there.
North Texas isn't that. And North Texas isn't that bad, actually. And they've been like perennially awful. Like, they were the joke of college football for years. They're actually not that bad.
Okay,
listen, and the Sun Belt's essentially an FCS conference.
What about
I'm not sure we lost it a couple of years ago.
What about one of the MAC divisions? Do we have any faith in the MAC West with the directional Michigan schools and all that? No. Okay, moving on.
That's a heck of a selling pitch.
I haven't gotten to Brian.
They might be the worst division in the Power Six. How about that?
Luke, you gotta know. There's always one thing that takes this podcast off the rails every episode,
and we have hit it.
Just did it. This podcast completely flies off the rails at least once.
All right, I'm gonna drag this elephant back into the stable.
All right, I'll finish the thought.
Okay.
I think the tough games I think are in the West, and I think Navy at home. I know it's homecoming and it's at home. But that style of play with Navy, we saw that. They're going to play it at their pace and at their tempo. They're going to shorten the game, shorten the possessions. So you have to be very efficient on offense because you're not going to get the ball a lot. So I think Navy and Memphis, from a conference standpoint, are the two toughest games in the league. Outside of the conference, I do think FAU is tough. I think Lane Kiffin can coach. I think they're going to score some points. The question will be, can UCF outscore them? And, keep the ball clean. And what I mean by that is not turn the ball over. Pittsburgh, I will say this. Pittsburgh's a team that's scrappy. You never know which Pitt team shows up. They seem to rise to the occasion when they're an underdog. North Carolina is kind of a wild card because they have a ton of injuries from last year. They got suspensions this year. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what to make of North Carolina, if they're going to be any good or not. So, but it's in Chapel Hill. So those are tricky games, but you're not going to sell me on Connecticut and Cincinnati and Temple as hard games. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen.
Well, I tried. Brian, I'll go. You're next. What do you think? Where's the stumbling block here?
Well, didn't I already talk about USF?
I don't know. I don't
forget.
We went off the rails there, and I forgot.
Jeff. We forgot the show.
See what happens?
Okay. I will follow up on one of Eric's points. It's a really good point. Like, the schedule's pretty soft, and I think one of the reasons why it's soft, not only because of the entire November being in Florida, but I love the way their bye weeks shake out. Like, this isn't a team that has like a full 2-week bye anywhere. Mm-hmm. They have 3 week-and-a-half byes. Now, the first one after the UConn game, preparing for South Carolina State. I mean, how necessary is that? We don't know, but we know they have the bye game after the ECU game. That bye leads into a Temple game at home that's on a Thursday. And so because they return from a bye on a Thursday, they get another week and a half behind that to prepare for Navy, which
key.
is so important.
Yeah, that's key for
so important.
Navy.
You get 3 or 4 more days to prepare for Navy.
Here are the games that concern me. Obviously, you talked about the Navy game, although, Brian, you make a great point about how there's like an extra 2 days to prepare. But people forget how hard-fought that game was last year. That was no blowout. And it took a huge play by Bam Moore, forcing a fumble. And not to mention the fact that Navy lost their quarterback. He was running all over us the first half of that game. Mm-hmm. And so they had to play without their quarterback. That game left us sweating a little bit. I'm concerned about
left Jeff on life support.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was hooked up to the oxygen after that one. I'm concerned about playing USF on the road, as is usually the case.
I mean, those empty seats are very intimidating. They're very loud.
Well, if that game comes down to the division, as it may very well be, you just never know. It's a roll of the dice. Obviously, I'm also concerned about the Memphis game on the road. The FAU game, boy, they're going to be ready for that. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of folks making the trip up from Boca for this game because they're treating this like it's the Super Bowl. This could be the big coming out party for the Lane Train if UCF's not careful. And I'm a little bit worried that they're not going to take FAU seriously simply because they're FAU.
Kevin Smith's homecoming.
Kevin Smith's coming back. Yeah, people forget that he's the running back coach at FAU. But I will give credit to one Luke Sarris for this little nugget. You ready, boys? Here we go. UCF comes in ranked number 21 in the country. As a team ranked in the AP Top 25, UCF all time is Luke, correct me if I'm wrong on this. 17-1. Is that correct?
Correct.
17 and 1.
I know the loss too.
Okay, what's the loss, Eric Lopez?
They lost at home to Southern Miss, right?
And who was the head coach of that Southern Miss team in 2010?
Larry Fedora.
Larry Fedora, who is now the head coach at
North Carolina.
North Carolina, that's right. So he's got that going for him, which is nice.
Which is nice.
At North Carolina.
The problem is he didn't have any Southern Miss players suspended for selling Mike Air Jordan shoes.
Yeah.
Fair point. Yeah. Fair point. But I'm still going to throw that out there. You better believe I'm hanging on to that little
synergy.
Yep.
Narrative
I like it. No, I like that. That's good.
Okay. So, all right. So we've got the schedule down. We talked about the offense. We talked about the defense. Let's go around the horn here as we kind of finish up. Okay. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to list our record predictions because we're going to have an article coming up this week, a little bit later this week, where everybody on the staff is going to be giving their predictions on the season. So I'm not going to spoil that one for you. What I'm going to ask each of you guys is for the entire team, okay? Best case scenario, and I know I did this with the offense, but I want to ask each of you guys this for the entire team in general. Best case scenario for the season, worst case scenario for the season. And you can give me a record if you want. You can give me just like one sentence that would sort of describe what happens. And I think, Eric, I'll start with you.
I actually think they can go undefeated. I don't think it. I think everybody's just assuming that they can't go undefeated. They could certainly go undefeated. Again, I think it's a manageable schedule for reasons that I've already pointed out. I think they're head and shoulders above everybody in the Eastern Division. And if they can stay healthy, I think they can get to undefeated again. I think they can go to the conference title game and host again. And I think they can end up in the Peach Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl again and repeat as Coley Matrix national champions.
Oh, don't throw that out there. Come on.
It is. What do you mean? What did I say? It's the Coley Matrix national champions.
So you sound like the Tampa Bay Times.
He did. Eric's a mole. Eric's a mole.
I said we're the repeat as national champions. I don't know what that's what it said in the NCAA. We're the national champion poll. I mean that's weird.
Joey Knight is listening to this podcast. He's very happy with what you just said.
What did I say wrong?
The check's in the mail.
Did I not say a factual statement? Did I not say a factual statement? I mean,
so your best case scenario is undefeated again, New Year's Six Bowl, but not the playoff.
Correct. They're not going to make the playoffs. And that's not being critical about it. It's just reality. Like, they're not going to get into the system. I mean, they didn't get into the system last year. They're not going to get in this year. I think the polls have kind of shown they're not. We're unfortunately the college football playoff is this party, and we're not invited to it. So I hope people. I really do. I generally hope people don't assume that because they go undefeated again that they're going to make the playoff. Historically, it hasn't happened. Boise State's gone undefeated twice. They haven't made the playoffs. It just isn't. And until the system changes to a group and expands to 8, it ain't going to happen. So I'm not looking at it as a negative. I'm just being reality about it. That's just the way it is. They're not going to make the playoff.
It won't happen until like 2024, right? Like that's how long this is in place.
Contract is coming up then 2024, 2025. Yeah.
Well, and we had we put it up on the site. Obviously, Tim Brando was on the Orlando radio station 96.9 on the Finish Line Drive Time show with Jerry O'Neill and myself. I actually had to fill in, and Barry Alvarez was even now discussing maybe going to 6 teams in the playoff, and but again, until we go to 8, because I'm not convinced even if they go to 6 that they're going to include a group of a non-Power 5 quote unquote team into the system. I think they're going to have to go to 8. And I've said this, the way you do it is you do the 6 conference champions automatically in. The Power 6, if you will, or if you want to say that the American is, joined in with the Mountain West and all that is the 6 conference champion, that's probably the way they're going to do it eventually. And then you have the 2 at-large teams. And I think we're going to get to that point. I just don't think it's going to be anytime soon. But they will get to that point eventually because there's plenty of money to be made on playoff games, and nobody cares about bowl games anymore as far as watching games is concerned. The television ratings prove that. So I think we're going to get to that. But to Murph, as you mentioned earlier, I don't think until the TV contract runs out, which is at about, I think it's 2024, I believe. It's around 8 years. I don't see a change in the system, and I certainly don't see them saying, you guys went undefeated again. We changed our mind. We're going to put you in. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I don't see the committee ever doing that. I don't see the AP poll doing that, and I don't see the coaches poll doing that. I mean, they kind of somehow get a pass in all this. They're just as guilty as everybody else in the system. So if you got a problem with it, blame all of them.
Okay, so if that's the best case scenario for UCF.
By the way, I'm okay with it. I'd sign off on it right now. I would sign off on it.
What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is thinking. Let me here's how I explain it. 2 years ago, when they went 6-7, they should have probably won the Temple game. They blew the Temple game. They blew the Houston game, and Houston had a big lead there, and they lost that game as well. There was a third game, the Maryland game, McKenzie's first start, where they turned the ball over.
That game went to overtime, and they lost it.
So you could argue that team probably should have been 9-3 if the ball bounces their way. It didn't bounce their way. I look at last year. They could have lost the Memphis title game very easily. I mean, Murph and I have discussed this in previous episodes about some Memphis really had chances to win that game.
They should have lost it. They should have lost that game like outright.
Yeah. Well, Memphis had a field goal to win it and missed.
Correct. So they could have lost that game. They could have lost the South Florida game. Mm-hmm. I mean, a play here or there could have easily turned that game around. And they could have lost either take your pick, either the Navy game or the SMU game. The SMU was driving. They had a chance to drive late in that game. So they could have easily been 9-3 last year if the ball doesn't bounce their way. The ball did bounce their way very easily. So my concern is, does things kind of even out and they drop 3 games out of nowhere? And it reminds me of the Houston team with Tom Herman. Remember Tom Herman, his first year, they went, I think, 11-1. They won the American Conference title. The only loss they had was because Greg Ward didn't play in it because he was banged up, and they beat Florida State. So they came with the hype the year after. They beat Oklahoma. Everybody's talking about them maybe crashing the party in the playoff, and they lost at Navy. They lost at SMU. They lost 3 games. And everything went wrong. And that's my worst case scenario fear, is that maybe the ball doesn't bounce their way. Maybe the intangibles don't go UCF's way, and you lose a couple of games here because either you turn the ball over too much or an injury to a position that really hurts you, like the offensive line or as Luke mentioned earlier, even, hopefully not, but the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's a completely different season. That's my concern and biggest fear. is you're an injury or two and a ball bounce away from maybe a couple of losses. But I think at worst they're 9-3. That's the worst case scenario.
You mentioned the Houston team. They went 13-1 in 2015. The following year in 2016, they finished 9-4 and lost in the Las Vegas Bowl. But that was the Houston team that they started out 5-0, and they were heading into Annapolis to play Navy at number 6 in the country. They started at number 15, beat then number 3 Oklahoma in the opener, and then lost at Navy, then they won a game at Tulsa, and then they lost at SMU, and then they lost at Memphis in the final game in the final game of the regular season, and then that was it. They were 9-3. They got, and congratulations, here's your ticket to the Las Vegas Bowl. So, and that was with 3 games at home to finish out. So, that was a tough break for Houston. Luke, best case scenario, worst case scenario?
Best case scenario, undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you
playoff or no?
Okay. And fans are not going to like this, I don't think they will let us in. Even if we go undefeated again, even if we're finishing, after the conference championship week on a 26-game win streak, it'll be amazing to see that play out if it does happen. You look at the schedule, there is no team on UCF's schedule that they cannot beat.
Right.
There's no team that you look at and say, oh man, this, it's going to be a miracle if we win this game. But, it's clearly almost impossible to repeat undefeated seasons. I mean, it hasn't happened in, almost 25 years.
Yeah, Nebraska in 94, 95 was the last, as far as I know, undefeated FBS team back-to-back, and they went 13-0 one year, 12-0 in the next.
Yep. But here's something else I found interesting, and I tweeted this out. We had a colleague here at SB Nation, Morgan. I can't pronounce her last name, but
Morgan Moriarty, I think you're talking about, right?
Moriarty, yes. Yeah. Sorry, Morgan. But she wrote this great article about G5 teams that went undefeated and then the next season fell apart. Here's the thing. She lists all these teams, all these seasons. Not one of these teams returned their quarterback from the previous season. I mean, I'm talking about 2004 Miami of Ohio when they had Ben Roethlisberger. 2004 Utah with Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. Mackenzie Milton, not only is he returning, but this is a guy who finished 8th in the Heisman voting for last year. So, I mean, you really can't compare. Even 2006 Boise, when they went undefeated the following season, they went 10-3. They didn't return their quarterback. I think this is a huge part of it. I think the talent is there. I think the schedule definitely, wills itself in a situation where UCF can win them all. With that being said, it's not realistic. But who thought going 13-0 and winning the Peach Bowl last year was realistic? Yeah. So, best case scenario, undefeated again. Even if that happens, I still think we'll be left on the outside looking in. But hopefully my boys at the Coley Matrix can come through again if that were to happen.
There you go.
Boy, you guys are. I just want to thank everyone for being so optimistic this year.
By the way, don't forget, we were also the Dan Levitard Show National Champions.
Yeah,
and the Nevada Dentist Association of
and the Touchdown Club of Columbus, Ohio.
And the Reddit College Football Net. Listen, we've had lots of
Reddit CFB. Yeah, you're right.
Listen, but it's just it's not realistic that it can happen again. Although it's definitely possible. I wouldn't give it a 0.0%.
I was going to say, let me ask you there. Where do you side, Luke? Because he's at 0. I got it at 50%. They can go undefeated. 50-50. I think they can go. Where do you go higher? Yes, I do.
So there's a 1 in 2 chance, Eric. Okay.
I don't honestly, Eric. I don't think that's crazy at all.
Thank you.
I really don't. I mean, fans don't want to hear it, and the SEC homers jump all over it. But who on our schedule can you say that team is going to beat us?
Well, you can't say that. I don't think. I think you're right, Luke. There's no. Every team is beatable.
We'll just see. Like I said, it has to be a perfect storm again. There are a lot of different variables, but it's doable. Worst case scenario, we go 11-3 with or 12-2 with hopefully a New Year's Six bowl. Mm-hmm. But I think if we lose two or more games, I think Boise's a good enough team that they'll get that G5 bid to the New Year's Six bowl. So, the thing is, it's going to happen eventually, and I say this all the time. I've been in too many Twitter battles for us to ever lose a game again. But when it happens, I mean, people are going to jump all over it. But the reality of the situation is, what happens this season has no way any effect on what happened last season. We went undefeated. All the accomplishments, they happen. And if we lose the game this year, it's going to sting and people are going to jump all over it. But that's not going to change anything we accomplished last year. But, there comes a time to be a realist and there comes a time to be a fan. And realistically, it's almost impossible to go back-to-back undefeated. But it's not impossible. I think if there's any team that can do it, granted talent and schedule, it's last year and this year's UCF team.
Brian Murphy.
Yeah, let me just say again, I don't think there's a game on this schedule that they're going to lose outright. I'm not saying they will definitely lose this game. I am saying I am resting my head on the pillow of history and saying that there's a reason why this hasn't happened in almost 25 years, because it doesn't happen. So to say that
it's hard. It's hard to do.
Or to give it a 50% chance, oy vey.
Hey, hey, I'm just saying, man. Got to be bold sometime.
Yeah, so 0.0. Look, to me, that also means they could go 12-1, and I could definitely see that happening. So I think the worst case scenario is a lot more grim. Look, this team was pretty lucky, not only in game, but in the medical room too. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the significant time injuries they had last, the guys they lost
Juwan
to major
Juwan Hamilton was a pretty big injury, I remember at the time.
Exactly. What also helps is when you have 4 of the running backs who were pretty good too.
Fair point.
So they had plenty of depth at that position. They lost Aaron Evans for the bowl game. I thought that was big. It held up well. Jake Brown played pretty well against a really good defense. Deidreon Bacote was a backup linebacker who basically missed the entire season. And then Neville Clark was suspended. He came back, played well. I love Neville Clark. I'm going to be on record and just say I have a huge man crush on him. I think he can be fantastic.
He's also has the incredible superpower being able to literally stand on his head.
It is for hours upon time. So Evans, Hamilton, Bacote, and there's one other Hudanik, who was kind of in and out of the lineup, but they had plenty of offensive line depth on the inside, on the interior. So there was 4 guys. That's it. For a full college season, that's really fortunate. So my worst case scenario is this Thursday, something cataclysmic happens to one Mackenzie Milton. That is your worst case scenario.
Don't do that. Don't
Heaven forfend. Unbelievable. Of course. I'm going to edit this out.
Of course it is your worst case scenario.
Why does it have to be this Thursday?
Because it's right away. It's right off the bat, right off the jump. Something happens. So, look, that is the worst case scenario, that something happens to Mackenzie Milton. They've raved a lot about Darryl Mack, but again, he's never played a game. So the worst case scenario is something happens to Mackenzie Milton that's cataclysmic. We spend our entire falls drying our eyes with the lays that they hand out before the season, and they probably go 6-7.
That's a pretty powerful case that I don't even want to think about.
Murph. Pretty dark.
That's
pretty dark.
Well, listen. I blame myself. I asked for the worst case scenario, and lo and behold, I got it.
I gave you the apocalypse.
No, Mackenzie Milton. I still think they're if they didn't have McKenzie the entire season, I still think they're an 8 or 9 win team.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Something
How many
says.
games is he wait, hold on. How many games is he? And that's an interesting question. So, are you saying that because you think it's more about the scheme and about the players around him than him? Why you say it, or is that because depending on which games he misses? Like, for example, he missed if he misses, I think the East Carolina game, I don't think it matters personally. But if he misses, for example, a game against Navy, I think that makes the biggest difference in the world.
Yeah, no. Listen, Mackenzie Milton has evolved into a fantastic quarterback, but he has almost an unlimited number of weapons around him. He goes down, you're still going to have guys like Otis and Adrian Killens and Dredrick Nelson. I don't think that – I mean, obviously McKenzie makes UCF one of the best offenses in the nation. But, you have to put in a backup quarterback. I still think the scheme and the skill players around the offense, warrant the team to still win, 8 games in line with the schedule.
I'm like breaking out into a cold sweat. All this talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would like to not think about that.
I can tell you this, by the way, real quick. By the way, assuming McKenzie Milton's healthy, right? Everybody's healthy. People I know in Vegas says that UCF will be favored by at least a touchdown in every game.
At least, well, as things stand right now.
Correct. Obviously, things could change. I mean, I think Memphis could be the one where I think if I had to guess, I think Memphis will end up being probably a 3-point game if Memphis is there undefeated or has a 1 loss.
Also, you have people you talk to in Vegas. This is news.
You're darn right. I have people across the country.
Who are they? Can I talk to them? I'm just
these are just tweets on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's what we'll go with. All right. Injuries notwithstanding, because God knows what would happen in that case. My worst case scenario is the games they lose end up being key games in the division race. So Memphis, USF, and then maybe you lose that game against FAU, maybe you lose that game against North Carolina, and then you're staring at 8-4, right? You just get some bounces. The bounces that went your way last year, they don't go your way this year. You end up losing those key games. You lose the division, and then hello,
Birmingham.
Whatever Birmingham, exactly. Let's have
Boca Raton.
Have fun there. Yeah, but actually, I wouldn't mind going down to Boca Raton. I'll be honest with you. But the best case scenario is, and this I think is what we're kind of arrived at a consensus. I think what you guys are all saying is this: UCF has a greater than 50% chance of winning each game they play, right? Mm-hmm. They have a less than 50% chance of winning all games, right? So if that's the case, I do think that the best case scenario is, they will go undefeated yet again. And they've won, and they go into the conference championship game winners of 25 games in a row. God knows, who knows who they play in the game? Probably Memphis, I would think. Either Memphis or Houston is probably who I would put my money on.
I wouldn't discount Navy out of that conversation.
Fair point.
I like their quarterback they have. I actually think he's an upgrade over what they had last year.
So it's going to be one of those 3 teams.
This is the year of the green wave.
Ooh,
that's a
rising up.
Bold predictions.
That is a bold prediction indeed.
Did they give Matt Forte more eligibility?
Oh, come on.
That's harsh. That's harsh. Let's be nice to our friends. Let's be nice to our friends from Fear the Wave now.
That's true.
And certainly in a 1-game situation, who knows? But they win the conference. They go to New Year's Six Bowl game, and here's my bold prediction. The difference between last year and this year is that UCF is actually starting ranked. All right, for the first time in school history, UCF is starting a season with a number next to their name. And I believe that, remember, it took, I think, 6 games for UCF to finally get ranked last year?
Like that.
Now that they are ranked, as they continue to win and other teams begin to fall out, UCF will start to climb. We saw this was the case with Boise State a few times, actually, starting last year. Or not last year, but starting after one of their undefeated seasons where they got a head start, and then all of a sudden, late in the season, they were, I think, number 3 in the country before they lost to Colin Kaepernick in Nevada in Reno in overtime. I think that was 2011, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. But my prediction would be if UCF goes undefeated and wins the conference, that they will sneak in as the number 4 team in the playoff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I knew you were going to set it up like that, and I can't believe it.
I think that the fact that they're starting out ranked is the key.
There's no doubt that helps.
Whether
there's a
people,
cap.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Whether people will admit it or not, those voters and the playoff committee, they know in the back of their heads they're not going to let UCF above a certain point. And
I think you have a point there. But here's my case about it, and forgive me, Luke, but my thing is, like, if UCF goes undefeated and they don't let UCF get, say, above like 6th, the very legitimacy of the college football playoff as a whole and the committee itself is at stake. That's why I think they would let them in.
Wait a minute, so you're telling me just because they put them 6, so I feel better about the system all of a sudden if they're I don't understand why we're really that outraged about we're number 6, so I feel better about it. I mean, I don't.
No. What I'm saying is if they keep UCF out, all of a sudden they look stupid in the eyes of the public.
I don't agree with that. I think you're going to have people. You're going to have your percentage of the audience that's going to say that no, they're not. They didn't play anybody and they didn't beat anybody, and they're going to go with the perception. College football is a lot like gymnastics and cheerleading. It's not really. It's about the names and stuff like that, unfortunately. So they've left Boise State out multiple times. They've left 2 Utah teams. You go to that page 115, which has been obviously become popular. Go to 2008. Utah went undefeated for the second time with a different coach, different quarterback. They went undefeated. They didn't even sniff it. They gave it to a 1-loss Florida team, won the national title, who lost to Ole Miss at home, the infamous Tim Tebow speech game. Oklahoma that year lost a game. This has happened over and over and over again. It's not like, this time we'll let you in. Now, I do agree with you in that I think if they were to go undefeated, I don't think they would be. I don't remember where. I think they were like 10th or 12th in the leading up to the Peach Bowl in the rankings. I don't think they would be as low. I think they would be inside the top 10, but I don't think they would be put in the top 4.
Luke, what do you think?
Well, I mean, those teams, that was a different era. I mean, that was the BCS era. There wasn't a committee selecting these teams, The bias. Well, I mean, I think the bias is even higher now because these people are deliberately saying, no, you're not good enough. It's not these computer simulations spitting out numbers and taking things into account and saying, okay, no, you're not in. It is people legitimately saying, we don't think you're good enough. And listen, there are 60 some odd teams who play non-Power 5 schedules every year. Why aren't more teams going undefeated if it's so easy? If it's so easy to just, win them all in a conference that's not a Power 5 conference, how come we don't see it more often? The thing of it is, as much as I want to say, okay, they would put us in, I don't think they would. And it's terrible. And there's going to be half the people saying, you're right, we're the Power 5, UCF hasn't played anybody. And then there's going to be people, who are going to be outraged. And like I said,
there were 6 people in the media that actually did not vote UCF into the top 25, which is laughable. It's laughable.
Right. But did we do it to ourselves? That's what I keep trying to figure out.
Right.
The uproar we made, is that why we're getting the disrespect? Or is it simply just disrespect for the teams and the conferences outside of the Power Five. And honestly, I think it's a little bit of both.
I agree.
Agreed. I agree with that. I agree with you, Luke. I think there's two parts. Yes, I think there are a percentage of people out there that are absolutely turned off by what all the chatter and all the 6-7 months. I mean, it's out there. Whether you like it or not, it's out there, and people have differences of opinion. That's how this works.
But let me ask you this though: what is the larger population? Is the larger population the number of people that are pissed off at UCF for doing that, or is the larger population, say, the number of people who are like, yeah, all right, UCF, stick it to the man? You know what I mean?
I think it depends on what region. I think it depends on the region. I mean, what region?
It depends on if you're affiliated with an SEC school or not.
That's not even true, because somehow along the lines, and I noticed this, somehow we got into this battle with Boise State fans.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And out of nowhere, I'm just like, why does Boise State hate us so much? And I actually saw a Boise player from one of their undefeated teams who were like, we paved the way for UCF. We would never do something like that. You know,
maybe they should have.
Well, that's the thing. You paved the way for us. Okay, you paved the way for us to get left out of the conversation just like you did. Thanks for the help. I appreciate that.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you know, it's either make noise, try to shake things up, which we did, or, you know, sit back with our fingers crossed and just hope for the best. And, you know, it's not popular, but I think it was necessary. But now it becomes a question of, did we do more harm than good?
I do have that concern, Luke, from this standpoint. Like, for example, I think UCF on paper is better than Boise State this year. I don't think there's any question about that, personnel-wise. But I think what I'm concerned about, let's say we get to that final vote in the committee, and forget the playoff thing for a second. Let's say it's between Boise State and UCF, and let's say they have identical records. Do they give the benefit of the doubt to Boise State because they're less pissed off at them than UCF? That's my concern.
Oh boy,
moving
that
forward
would be.
On this.
I would put Danny White's Twitter account on notifications if that was.
Well, and here's the thing: I'm going to warn everybody about. Boise State plays at Oklahoma State. You watch. If they beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater, they're going to hold that trump card over a UCF potentially. So I think, Luke, that's interesting. You bring up the Boise State thing, because I did notice that. I think it's a divided topic, to be honest with you, because I think college football in general is divided. I think, look, there are people out there that like the system the way it is, that don't think they should have a playoff because it's the regular season. I don't agree with it, but there are a lot of people that are out there, both in media and fan bases. I also think there are people that are not necessarily supportive of UCF in this cause, but they're more anti-Alabama, so that's why they're supportive. There's also the camp that says, hey, let's just have a playoff. So I think there's a lot of different agendas going on with this, so it's hard. The thing that I think is important this year, you bring up the Boise thing. I think it's important for UCF to follow up with a monster year, whether it be 10-2, 11-1, 12-0. I think the one thing that Boise has is they've been consistent across the board for over a decade. And I think they're now, as a result, they get the benefit of the doubt in the rankings, where I do think there are people that are skeptical of, can this team win without Scott Frost? Mm-hmm. Can this team do it again? Or this is the program that has had 2 winless seasons in the last decade, which not too many programs could say, unfortunately. Yeah. And they have had a history of flopping. They've had a 5-win season after the year they went to the Liberty Bowl. So that there are, I think, the consistency. If UCF can put 10+ wins here back 5 years in a row, let's say, I think UCF will start getting the respect. That's how college football works. I know it's bizarre. I know people don't like it. It shouldn't come to that. It should be about this year and only this year, or last year and last year. But that's how this sport works. It's weird. It takes time for people. Like, nobody embraced TCU for the longest time until the very end when they beat Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. And then next thing you know, they got into the Big 12. So Same thing with Utah. So I think I do think this year the most important thing is to this program to have another monster year, win the league, and start building consistency so then people can shut up, basically.
Well, let's wrap up with this point. when it comes down to the battle between Boise State and UCF for that New Year's Six position. Gentlemen, I ask you this. What's the one common opponent that both of those teams have this year?
UConn.
Yep. UCF plays UConn in the opener, and Boise State plays at home against UConn on Saturday, September 8th. So you better believe, at least I do, that when it comes down to that might be a factor, which means that this opener is going to be huge.
Well, I think you better throw in FAU in that conversation, because even if FAU loses to Oklahoma, let's say FAU loses to Oklahoma, wins out, including a win over UCF, that could be their trump card, because I think they're going to run roughshod in Conference USA. So if they were to beat UCF, that could be the tiebreaker that FAU with Lane Kiffin, who the media loves, okay? The media loves Lane Kiffin. They can't get enough of Lane Kiffin. They could get the benefit of the doubt as well. By the way, the other thing that hurts UCF, everybody's focused about where UCF's ranked. You know what really hurts? There's no other team in the American Conference that gets ranked. That's a problem.
Yeah.
We have to change the perception of that. We have to start getting multiple teams in the league getting ranked in the preseason. That's why people have the perception that UCF doesn't play anybody in the conference. They're ranked in the conference, which is not fair, because you have no control over that. That's why I think it's a flawed argument when every time people bring up schedules. I mean, Gonzaga doesn't play anybody in college basketball in their conference, in the West Coast Conference. Doesn't mean they're not one of the best teams in the country. So I think it's a flawed argument. But I think that's the perception that hurts UCF, is that you look at the American, well, there's nobody ranked. And whereas the other leagues have multiple teams ranked, that hurts too.
And I'll dovetail that by saying, it would really help UCF if Memphis could beat. Now, Memphis has pretty much a junk non-conference schedule, because they got Mercer and South Alabama, but they do have Missouri. So again, SEC. South Florida plays Georgia Tech and Illinois, I believe. I know they're not high class teams, but they are still Power Five. The Power Five, sorry, Danny White. They are still Power Five teams. That means something. Those teams need to win those games. That helps UCF.
Yep, that's a good point. And that'll be key as we move toward the regular season, which begins on this Thursday, August the 30th. All right, let's wrap this thing up real quick. Before we go, let's figure out what we're all working on here for this week. Luke, this is your first time on the podcast. What are you working on for this week?
So I will have your UConn preview coming out here within the next day, so keep an eye out for that. I'm going to break down the biggest rivalry in UCF history.
Where the hell is the trophy? Brian, what do you have coming up?
I will have a article about Randy Shannon's defense that's about a week overdue. I'll have that up at some point before kickoff. I'm also planning to put out my article. This is very much very much related. My conversations with Chad Mottola and Drew Butera, both of whom are UCF Athletics Hall of Famers, and I got to talk to each of them down in Tampa Bay last weekend when I went to a Rays game. So I'll have that on the site, and whatever else pops into my small, tiny brain.
Solid weekend read there. Okay, hitting up some baseball. There you go. Ela, what do you got? Other than, of course, the Otis Anderson bit, which was really good, by the way. Everyone needs to check that out.
Yeah, you can go right now to blackandgoldbanneret.com. You can see the one-on-one interview I had with Otis Anderson. He talked about the position of the utility position, which is what he's defined as playing the receiver and the running back position, and what goes into that. He talks about that and who influenced him as far as growing up. So it's a really good stuff, as well as what UCF player took him under his wing last year. I had a really good conversation with Otis. I plan to do that hopefully every week, or at least every other week, with different UCF athletes, current and past. We're actually going to have in the near future my one-on-one I'm going to have with Courtney Whitten of women's soccer, who scored the memorable goal against Florida State.
Yep.
Women's soccer season. So I'm going to have that. Hope to have also Kyle Israel in the near future, quarterback from the UCF 07 conference title, working on that. Among other things, obviously, TV ratings stuff will be coming out, hopefully, for the UConn game, although it's an ESPNU, so it could be tricky to get those numbers. So I'll be monitoring that and any other media stories that comes out that involves UCF. In fact, that will certainly could be some of the things in play. And of course, I have other obligations during the week. Depending when you're listening to this, I will either have been on or will be on 96.9 The Game on Tuesday. You're filling in on the finish line 3 to 6 with Jerry O'Neill, the sideline reporter for 24.
The mustache himself.
Yes, and then our very own Jeff Sharon, by the way, will be on that show on Fridays during the season.
Yes,
so
indeed.
you will be on this Friday, probably recapping that UConn victory, the UConn victory against the Huskies by 30 points.
That's UCF's favored by 23.5, by the way. Here's what I've got coming up this week. We all have, obviously, be on the lookout for Luke's preview of the game coming up, as well as, all right, we got some really cool stuff coming up. We reached out to our friends in the SB Nation network at the UConn blog, and we traded 5 questions. So we sent them 5 questions about UConn that they sent back to us the answers, and we're doing it vice versa with them as well. So be on the lookout for that. We will also have another podcast coming up where we preview the UConn game, and one of them will be joining us as well for that. That will be coming out on. We're going to record that on Wednesday night. Don't forget to join us Thursday night. We will have our live blog as we did last year, but it's going to be a fuller house, to say the least. On blackandgoldbanneret.com, we will have we will live blog the game. You can follow us at blackandgoldbanneret.com. We are also on Twitter at UCF_Banneret as well, and Facebook.com/blackandgoldbanneret. Individually, you can follow us at Jeff_Sharon. Also, Eric Lopez Elo, Spokes_Murphy for Brian, and Luke is at Luke Sarris SBN. And you can subscribe to our podcast on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Luke, Brian, Eric, thanks again, boys. It's been grand. I'll catch up with you guys during the week, and we'll have one more podcast coming in to talk about the UConn game.
Whee! Looking forward to it.
Off we go. Whee! All right. Thanks, fellas. Appreciate it as always. And this has been the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. I'm Jeff Sharon. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you later this week for our preview of the UConn game.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.